First, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land and all the lands I work and live on in Australia and in other places in the world. I think from the title, the only part I might have to explain to you is what rock art is, which are human markings on in situ natural surfaces. There's a lot more complicated definitions, but I think that's the simplest, and that's about all archaeologists are going to agree on. This is going to be a bit of a different kind of presentation because it's sort of, I'm asking you for help. I'm going to show you a lot of stuff we're doing with rock art, and if you can think of tools or models or things you do that can help us with our rock art research, I'd love it if you talk to me afterwards or send me an email and like, hey, why don't you try this tool and we can work on this stuff together, and that would be great. Australia alone has, like, the latest estimate is 150,000 rock art sites, and only a tiny fraction of those have been found or even recorded. So there's still so much to do, especially because we keep destroying it, you know, sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally and sometimes with the best intentions, but we are destroying a lot of rock art. So these are some of my toys or tools, whichever way you want to look at it. I'm not going to talk about all of them right now, but these are the things most digital archaeologists try to use to record the rock art and study it as well. This is another scanner we've added, which is, you can both hand-hold it and mount it on a drone, so it's very versatile. You might be wondering, well, that doesn't, I mean, it might not work that well with rock art because of the fidelity, and yeah, that's something we found and we're trying to work on, trying to improve, putting the color under the point clouds, maybe combining photogrammetry and laser scanning in different ways. So, photogrammetry, I'm going to assume most of you know what it is, but just the briefest thing, it's overlapping photographs to create 3D models. And we take a lot of this for granted, but when I started, and I took it for granted too when I started my PhD 10 years ago now. I finished, but 10 years ago is when I started. And I took it for granted that people in Australia doing rock art were going to be doing photogrammetry, but they weren't. And that's kind of why I had to refocus my research into a lot of these digital methods. And it took a lot of convincing for my supervisors to get on board with this because, well, like a lot of people, we're always hesitant to these new things. Maybe not people in this room, since you seem to embrace technology very easily, but a lot of archaeologists are stuck in their old ways and they don't, trust these newfangled things. So I spent a lot of time trying to show that it's both metrically and visually accurate. And this is an example of, from this one paper that we wrote together, where throughout the whole paper, I was trying to still prove it to them that it was visually accurate. And we did this little test, which was very unfair, which was whether my 3D model made from a prosumer camera was just as good to get a tracing off from their professional camera. So that's really an unfair test, but they had to admit, look, if you make a high-quality model, you can make a really good tracing from it. Now, the part in the middle there, the false color, it's a decorrelation stretch. This is something that most rock art researchers use for enhancing painted rock art. It's an algorithm that was developed by NASA for the Mars rover, because on Mars everything was red and they had to see differences in red. So we've applied this to rock art so that we can see things that you can't see necessarily with the naked eye until you enhance it. There are now, you can get this on your phone or your iPad, and you can do it right in the field. It's called ID stretch. So we also do a lot of laser scanning. And this is some photogrammetry, and then a laser scan, which doesn't have very good color in a dark cave unless you can light the cave, which is, very difficult to do to light the whole cave. But what I did was, in this situation, was just combine the methods and make a very good colored model of the rock art and have the geometry of the rest of the cave. This is a bit of a long video, so I'm just going to let you watch it for a bit. So as you'll see, when we start to exit the cave, some of the color comes because the laser scanner does have an RGB camera, the one I'm using, which is the BLK 360, which wasn't made for this. It's made for architecture, it's made for doing interior of buildings and stuff on very small scale, but because it's so portable, we've been using it for rock art research in caves. Okay, I'm gonna skip past that one. This is another 3D model of photogrammetry of another cave on Guam. And this one I lit up. So because it was only a small area and I had enough lights to do it, we lit up the area with the rock art, and then we can create a very photorealistic model. This is another combination of laser scanning and photogrammetry. So you get the really good color and definition from the photogrammetry, and again, the geometry of the cave. But because this is a rock shelter, there's a lot more natural color, so it doesn't look quite like the one that's inside the cave. What's great about this, I'm not sure if many of you have heard of Magnificent Gallery, but it was a very famous rock art site in far north Queensland. And it kind of changed during a time when Cairns was becoming a booming town. This is a story I've heard from this artist, Vernon Aki. It became very overexposed. And from his art practice, he's a very famous indigenous portraitist, I guess that's what you call them. Some of his work's in the Mona, and he has exhibits in New York and in Paris and stuff like that. But what he did, he took the 3D model I made, and he built a computer with an Xbox controller so people could zoom in and out and sort of fly themselves through the 3D model, which I loved, because I love it when the people who are connected to the rock art engage with it, especially in this way. And this was an exhibit up in Cairns back in July and August during the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair. And I think what really blew me away with this was being given like an artist title. So I got an artist badge, and I got a little artist credit in this. This is another 3D model from a cave in Malaysia, where again, you're just going to see how I couldn't do the whole cave. It was just too big. So I just focused on the parts of the rock art with the photogrammetry, and again, used the scanner for the general geometry of the cave. And remember that algorithm I told you, D-stretch? So I started applying it on 3D models, and we started doing full recordings of sites all from the 3D model, which we found saved a lot of time, of course, because the most expensive aspect of a project is the field work. It's also the most fun, unfortunately, but to save costs, you can make the 3D, take the data you need to make the 3D model and then do all the analysis in the lab. And this is something I helped another PhD student with. So I made a 3D model of the site, and he was trying to understand the superimposition, like the layering, what's on top of what. So he traced, so I made the 3D model, I converted it into a 2D orthomosaic. He did the tracing, and then I put it back on the 3D model. And this is one of my favorite examples of what D-stretch can do. So can you guys see what the rock art here is? Maybe, maybe not. It's a buffalo, and there's kangaroos and all this stuff there. And you can even see it's a certain style. It's an X-ray buffalo, and because we know buffalo is an introduced species as well, we kind of have a date for when this rock art, the earliest it could be. D-stretch has been something that has really, a lot of the traditional owners I work with really like. I made one of these for someone in central Queensland, and she still takes it with her when she takes potential donors or she does little tours of her country. She has this in her pocket, and she asks them to look at the rock art. It's not this particular site. And when they can't, they give a few guesses, and then she shows them what the D-stretch looks like, and they're just blown away and give her more money. And this is something probably very familiar to a lot of you GIS people, of like lining up imagery, but for rock art people, this blows them away. I showed this in Indonesia a couple of weeks ago, And they were all like, man, you have to show us how to do this, So making the 3D model using older photographs and just overlaying them so that we can sort of do a visual change detection, because archaeologists will always argue, and it's not just archaeologists, but people always think like, oh, the rock art's fading, then like all these, I thought it was different before, oh, look, but when you do this, you kind of see, well, maybe the rock art isn't actually changing, it's just the graffiti now over it and things like that. This is another example from the Northern Territory. And I always like this because we have photos from the 70s even, and then the 90s, and then in 2019. And we tell the traditional owner, Kenneth, that that's the same guy, right, in the 90s when he's a young man, and then in 2019. And we tell him he's fared much better than the rock art has. And that's... what's happened to this site is there was a tropical cyclone, I think Monica, that went through and changed the vegetation, took out all the protective vegetation on top of the site, and it just degraded very quickly. And this was an area that never had those kinds of typhoons before. This was kind of a eureka moment during one of my projects in the Philippines, where I was using the laser scanner. And I looked at the intensity values and discovered that we can use it to find hidden rock art. So when we first saw this panel, we were like, well, it's all graffiti. If there's something there, we can't see it. But using that, we find that we can. And there's now a master's student in Germany I'm mentoring to work more on this, to look at the intensity values, because maybe we can find the signature of graffiti and sort of extract that from the rock art so that, if we're not confused which part is rock art and which part's graffiti, we'll have a signature to it. Another project I'm on is, so we are looking at rock art, we're looking at bark paintings, and we are trying to give the proper artists their recognition. So, bark paintings, and in the tradition of these places, a lot of them, they don't sign their work or anything, but through the style, we can sort of connect them. And so for this one, Majambu is actually the grandfather of Kenneth Manguru, one of the traditional owners we worked with on this. And when he saw it, because he hadn't seen that bark painting, but he knew it immediately that was his grandfather's style. And so there's a bit of a longer story to this, but I'll just give you a sum up of these bark paintings. So they're now all in the Melbourne Museum, even if they're originally from the Northern Territory. Melbourne Museum has been willing to give it back, but the community is like, well, why don't you keep it first, because they're so fragile, they won't survive the journey, and they don't have a way to store them because they're climate controlled right now in Melbourne Museum. So I went to Melbourne Museum and I recorded all of the bark paintings in 3D, and my PhD student put them in a virtual reality environment. And this is kind of an older video from last year. I think we were still using Oculus 2, and now we're using Oculus 3, which for those of you who play with the VR headsets, 3 is much, much better for just getting rid of the dizziness, the hand recognition and everything. And the community loves this. So we've taken several versions back to them, and they've given us suggestions for things they want added, things they want us to do, and they've asked us to come back for Stone Country Festival, which is the one day a year that the closed community opens up to share their culture to whoever has a ticket. And we're going to have these VR headsets there for people to try. What we've also found, though, is it's pretty lonely doing VR by yourself. So if we have right now I'm just showing it on my phone, but we're going to have a big screen and everything so everyone can watch what the person's doing. And that's been kind of fun because you can see them, what they're looking at, and if they're going up to the fire, which all of them seem to be very attracted to the virtual fire. And we've had some great comments, like someone picked up the bark painting and he was like, whoa, it's so light, because it's just air. You know? So we are considering whether we should have actual boards and try to line that up. My PhD student says it might be a bit difficult, but we might give that a go. And even the women love it, which is great. It's not just for the men. Okay, so that was all the stuff I talk about with paintings mostly, and now it's about engravings. So those are the two main forms of rock art. And I told you about D-Stretch, which was already available when I started my rock art journey, but there was nothing to enhance engravings. Now, people were using D-Stretch on engravings, and that was just wrong because you're stretching color, and that's not what an engraving is, right? An engraving is a difference in elevation. And this is, and I'm going to plug in that Fiji conference again. 10 years ago, I went to the conference in Fiji, and I knew almost nothing about GIS. And I remember asking someone there, well, what can you do with GIS? And the answer was everything. And so now every time I have a problem, I go to someone with GIS, and I'm like, so do you have a solution for this? Because apparently you have the answers to everything. But there, so what we did here was I made the 3D model, and I worked with Maria Kottemeyer, and she did the hillshade and the TPI, and this was like the breakthrough of my PhD. In fact, after writing up this paper, I remember the tram ride home, and I just felt like mic drop. They should just give me my PhD now. I don't have to do anything more. You know, I've done so much for my discipline with just this, but that's not how it works. So I had to finish everything, submit, and go on. And of course, since it was a new method, we still did the old method, which was the manual tracing, which the digital one of, you know, I will never do manual tracing again. Not only does it take forever and it's tedious and you're damaging potentially the rock art, it's inaccurate. You know, I found 100% more rock art using the digital enhancements. And also the manual tracing led to a lot of false positives. And just another example of it. So you really see it much, much better. And this is one of the ones where you could actually kind of see it already, even without any enhancement. There were so many that were very, very faint, like the ones you see in the background of some of these, where the lines are so faint that you can't see it when you're there, even when you're trying to feel it. And this technique got me invited to New Zealand, where I was working with a Maori archaeologist there, and he was pointing to this panel, and he's like, you know, in the 70s, someone said there was rock art here, we just can't find it. So I took the pictures I needed, I went back to my office, I enhanced it, and I sent it back to him, and he went back with the Maori owner of the land, and you know, they found it again, and they were so happy. This is a picture of him on the right with my enhancement and being able to find the rock art again. And then a few times since they sent me more, they take the photos now and they send it to me and I process it, and then they can go find their rock art. Actually, they haven't contacted me in a while, so now I'm wondering if they do it for themselves, which is good. I'm glad. And so the next step to that was the tracing of it. So if you look at the bottom right, that's the very crude tracing I did in GIS for my PhD. And, you know, I'm a little embarrassed about it now, but I feel like that's okay. I was very new to GIS, and it's fine. But I worked with John Schuker to do it to automate this process, which, of course, right? Why would you do it manually when you can automate this? And this is something I think the archaeologists in the room will appreciate, is you still sort of decide what sort of sieve size you're using. So if you look at the B, that's an auto sieve size of 100, and you're capturing so much. So it's kind of like when you're sieving after a dig, and you have a big, your big pile, and you have to decide which sieve size you're going to use. It's the same thing here, except of course you do it much, much quicker. But the results are the same. If your sieve size is too small, you catch so much noise. If your sieve size is too big, you might not get all the artifacts. So similarly, you have to make those decisions. And then this is Dylan Sarah. He's a traditional owner from up near Bundaberg, and his rock art story, if you ever get a chance to hear him speak, it's amazing. So the Queensland government dammed up this area and decided to save the rock art by cutting it into like 90 pieces, 2-meter blocks, and sending them all over Queensland. And he's been trying to get them all back. He's located about 80 of them. And some of them really were like in the randomest places, like at a train stop where people were just sitting on. And some of them are in UQ, and some of them are at Griffith, actually. So his art practice is based a lot about his journey to finding his rock art again. And he did a very manual process with mescaline cloth and rubbing. So it's kind of the old way of doing it, but in his own artistic style. And then we enhanced it. He came to me because he had heard of some of the stuff I do. And then we enhanced his rock art, and he was blown away because even him spending hours with the rock, feeling it, feeling every bit of it, couldn't find as much rock art as this. And then you probably thought, well, are we ever going to get to machine learning? So now we'll talk a bit about it. I'm not a data scientist. I just work with data scientists to get some of these things done. So at this point, I realized I have so much data. I'm taking so many photographs of rock art, and we need to do something with it. Data should have more than one purpose, right? And I went to a data science workshop, which was like this intensive 5-day, 8 hours a day, mind-blowing thing, where I came out realizing, you know what, I just have to make friends with the person giving the lecture. So which is what I did, and then we worked on this together. I was like, hey, how do you want to work on this, figuring out, make a machine learning model that can figure out if an image has rock art or not. And he was up for it. The little bit of a problem was that I had mostly pictures of rock art and very few pictures of no rock art. But he found a workaround. And actually, I went back to the area, and I started taking pictures, and this confused the tourists like crazy, because I was taking pictures of all the places without rock art. And they were like trying to follow me around. And so this was in this area of Kakadu National Park. And the traditional owner of this land is Jeff Lee, who's an amazing person. So it was a bit scary doing that work because I had to write the paper. I told him about it before I started, and he was on board. But the way we work is after we've done all the work and before we publish, before we send it, we go through it with him to make sure he's still okay with it and he understands all the implications. And so, this is 2 years of work we've done on this, and he at any point could be like, no, I don't want that. So that was very nervous conversation to have with him, but he was on board. He just said, I'm happy for the model to be out there, but I don't want the images. Fair enough. And the journal, which usually they're like, this is really unorthodox. Usually you submit the data with the model. And I'm like, well, take it or leave it. This is what the traditional owner wants. And they took it. But yeah, and he is, I think sometimes I often think about him because this is why we do this, why people, rock art researchers like me, are so drawn to this. He is a traditional owner that in 2007 was wooed by a French mining company to sell the mining rights for $5 billion, and he said no. And I often think about how many people I know who would say no, and really only traditional owners. And that's the kind of relationship to country, I feel that we need to protect, that we need to respect. If they're willing to say no to $5 billion, then, I should put as much effort as I can into the research that they want done or whatever they want done with their country. Also, he is the sole survivor still, and he's still working on an heir, he says. So some of the other things with rock art since I published that paper. So that paper was, yes, this is a proof of concept, to find rock art, no rock art, but it's also other things we can do. And since then, a lot of people have stepped up and done things with machine learning and rock art. So there's object recognition and detection. There's a project in far north Queensland working with Indigenous children to do the classifications of the rock art. So they also spend time on country and learn about the rock art, but then they're also helping with the classification to train the machine learning model, which will hopefully lead to this sort of knowledge graph which we use for rock art research. There's this student in India working on motif extraction that I met a few years ago, so it's good that this is getting done as well. This one hasn't really been done yet that I know of, but I'm sure it wouldn't be that difficult with all the generative AI out there now. And then we're also doing rock art perspecting with autonomous drones. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go quickly through this. So we are going through the landscape with drones and, kind of like the no rock art kind of model. Well, then if you put it on a drone too to sort of figure out where there's rock art, and then someone like me goes and verifies it, and it just creates this whole cycle of training the model then based on what's there. And then using BIVLOS drones, so they want to set up a whole BIVLOS drone with solar panels and then Starlink, and then the drone can just go every day whenever the weather's good and just go looking for rock art. This is another project with. I'm going to skip through it because I think I'm running out of time, right? Oh, yeah, okay. So this is another kind of rock art, which is called finger flutings. We go down this very deep cave and walk walk 150 meters in darkness, and then there's finger flutings there. So people did this tens of thousands of years ago. It's so fascinating. And I'm going to go through this quick now. I'm just going to skip that. So that's what finger flutings look like. Little zoomed up version, and then I went through the whole process again of tracing it and everything, but there's so little we know about them, and there's so many people making assumptions. Like for that one site, someone was claiming, oh, it's a men's site, women shouldn't go, but the traditional owner was like, but my grandmother took me there. How can this be a men's site if my grandmother took me? And then some people are like, yeah, but we also see their children's prints, and if they're children's prints, then there have to be women. Like, okay, so a lot of theories going around, and so what I did was I wrote a small grant to do a tactile and virtual approach to understanding the finger flutings, where we collected 2 different data sets, one that was virtual and one that was tactile. And the results will go through some machine learning to see if, with our knowns, like if we already know sex, if we already know height and handedness and all these aspects of a person, can a machine tell from the data? And this is my latest project, which is I'm recording this whole hill in the Northern Territory using laser scanning drones and photogrammetry and all the things I've been showing that's where it is, with the artists and traditional owners from the area. So they'll do the photogrammetry and they'll take the pictures and I'll process it. And what's great about working on this site is they have so much knowledge. Like they can, like most rock art, people guess what it is and they guess what the story is, but they actually know. They have the legends that go with it, and they can tell you, when we went, this is the 2 brothers, and this is a bad man, he did this, and that's why he was cursed with that. And these stories are invaluable. And so adding all that with the placement data, I think we're gonna find so much more about our heritage. Okay, whew. Oh, so I could have gone back. Okay, geez, now what do I go back to? Yeah. These are just some of the pretty 3D models they made.
We might have time for one question, though.
No questions. I'll just talk some more. So, yeah. Okay, since we do have 2 minutes I'm going to talk about this thing I skipped over. So this was pretty exciting for us because, like I said, it's a completely dark cave. And, the options are to bring in lights, and a lot of lights. But, you always worry about how that's going to affect the cave, bringing in the batteries, all these other factors. So we tried something we're calling chiaroscuro photogrammetry. So why I wanted to share this is because we were inspired by this old Renaissance technique. And, oftentimes we're inspired by the newest, latest, most amazing thing out there. But I think the point we can make with this is that we can also look to the past to find inspiration to solve our problems. So we did it. And so we didn't just look at the past, because Darren Zhu and Ruben Wu also did this. They also looked at this chiaroscuro method for their photography, to illuminate underwater this plane and to illuminate Stonehenge for National Geographic cover. And we did it, and we were able to make a really good 3D model doing this method. So if you want to read a bit more about that, and it's a super easy method, and that's what I love about it. You know I have a lot of fancy tools now, but I'm very drawn to the low cost or free things. And this one, as long as you know photogrammetry and you have a headlamp, which you'll have to have when you're down there in that cave anyway, you can do this, this process and you'll come out with a great model. And it's much easier to use than Flash. So we did a test on Flash and this, and yeah, if you're interested in that, it's this paper. Okay, good, no questions.